doctors disagree. One source defines obesity as body weight 20% over standard height and weight charts. The National Institutes of Health says obesity is, and I quote, complex and deeply rooted in biologic systems, adding, it is almost certain obesity has multiple causes and that there are different types of obesity. Tonight, Susan Spencer looks at people who may have slim chance of losing weight no matter how rigorously they diet.
Sip into something irresistible, sip into Diet Pepsi.
In the media, in fashion, in the entire culture, being slim is the ideal. Being fat is the reality.
Diet strikes right. Take it over and back.
34 million Americans are overweight, a third of them defined as obese. And for all the pills and clinics and programs, only a fraction loses the weight and keeps it off, hard as they may try.
People look at you and say, oh, wow, you know, look at this person. You know, they really must not care. They just don't care, and that's not true.
But caring may not be enough. Though compulsive eating and poor habits obviously play a role, some doctors also now believe that there are biological factors that tend to keep fat people fat.
It's as though they're programmed to be at another weight. We don't know what the biologic factors are which push them up to this higher weight and keep them, in a sense, more comfortable at that weight.
Researchers who have studied fat cells suspect that when an obese person starts to lose much weight, his body fights it. His fat cells send out alarm signals because his body thinks he is literally starving.
The fat tissue of formerly obese people seems to resemble that of normal people who are undergoing a fast.
And the theory goes, as in someone who really is starving, the body then uses calories more slowly, making it all the harder for a severely overweight person to keep it off. Take Renee Kolonsky. She dropped 65 pounds, then had a stomach stapling operation to lose more. But even though she says she eats next to nothing, no dice.
In order to maintain my weight, I have to hold 700 calories a day, plus walk. Without the walking, the weight would shoot right back up.
People have been skeptical of this and have said, well, they're probably sneaking food on the side or they're really miscalculating their food intake. Our studies show that, in fact, they're not.
The lucky few who do lose weight, people like Harriet Friedlander, now 75 pounds lighter than her former self, often say they suffer physically as their bodies try to keep them heavy.
I'm not as energetic and vivacious as I was at 200 pounds, but I'm willing to give up a certain level of that.
Researchers say that considering the biological factors involved, some heavy people who don't have medical problems may be better off staying heavy. That for them, heavy is normal.
The answer is that it's just the way that I'm supposed to be. The rest of the world's going to have to recognize that there are fat people, there are thin people, there are in between. Okay, so this is the way life is.
What makes it so hard for now is that the rest of the world is a long way from recognizing any such thing. Susan Spencer, CBS News, Philadelphia.
What started with an espionage arrest of a retired U.S. Navy officer tonight took a more ominous turn. The arrest of the man's active duty son aboard a U.S. nuclear aircraft carrier. The son allegedly found with a hidden box of classified documents next to his bunk. Sources tell CBS News Pentagon correspondent David Martin it appears to be a father-son spy ring for the Soviets and a serious setback to U.S. Navy secrets.
A 22-year-old sailor aboard the aircraft carrier Nimitz is under arrest and charged with espionage tonight as part of an alleged family spy ring, which Navy officers tell CBS News probably resulted in the worst compromise of U.S. Navy secrets ever. The alleged head of the ring is this man, John Anthony Walker, a retired warrant officer who reportedly boasted that he had every security clearance known to man. When Walker was arrested and charged with espionage on Monday, a U.S. attorney said there is evidence he has been passing secrets to the Soviets for up to 18 years. Navy officers say Walker's alleged espionage appears particularly serious because he was a communications expert who served aboard 2 nuclear missile submarines during the mid-1960s and later at Atlantic Fleet headquarters as a communications watch officer for the entire Atlantic submarine force. In the mid-1970s, he held a similar job for communications with all surface ships in the Atlantic. Navy officers say that in those jobs, Walker would have had access to communications codes and operating orders for Navy submarines and warships, as well as the emergency procedures for launching nuclear missiles. He was arrested after FBI agents saw him allegedly leave a shopping bag full of classified Navy documents at this drop site in Maryland. Some of the documents apparently came from the Nimitz, where his son Michael works as a clerk in the ship's operations department. The senior Walker also has a stepbrother, Gary, who works on mine-sweeping helicopters like these as an electronics technician. Gary's mother is quoted as saying he was picked up for questioning by FBI agents who asked him to take a lie detector test. The FBI says Gary has not been arrested.
The alleged spy ring apparently began and ended as a family affair. A source close to the investigation told CBS News Walker's wife and daughter turned him into the FBI. Dan?
What good would Walker's information have done the Soviets, David?
Dan, the Soviets have a very limited ability to track the movements of our submarines, and the Navy goes to very great lengths to keep it that way. So if Walker was indeed passing copies of operations orders to the Soviets, he was enabling them to track our submarines with a precision they could never do on their own. The good news is that operations orders and the codes that go with them change on a daily basis, so that whatever damage was done back in the 1960s and 70s is largely over and done with.
Thank you very much, David Martin at the Pentagon. It was a mix of proud tradition and changing times at today's U.S. Military Service Academy commencement ceremonies. A thundering flyby of the Blue Angels greeted President Reagan in the class of '85 at the U.S. Naval Academy. President Reagan shook hands with each and every one of the more than 1,000 graduates. Mr. Reagan did some thundering, too, on the subject of Pentagon spending.
You will hear during your career, as I've heard during times in my life, that maintaining the military at peak readiness, keeping our forces trained and supplied with the best weapons and equipment is too costly. Well, I say it is too costly for America not to be prepared.
At commencement conclusion, Hail to the Chief gave way to the time-honored hats-off salute. Today's special pride at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point saw the commissioning of the first 2 native Vietnamese graduates. They were among a record-sized class of 1,010 new Army lieutenants. Across Beirut's Green Line, from where most of the latest fighting has been raging, there was violence today, massive violence, in an area that had thought itself safe. A car bomb exploded, sending fireballs roaring through the streets and leaving a crater 10 feet deep. As many as 60 people were killed, 190 wounded. Tom Fenton in London narrates our report.
The car bomb that created this carnage today in Christian East Beirut carried over 400 pounds of high explosives. It ripped the walls off apartment houses and spread death and panic in the street. It was detonated at a busy intersection at the height of the rush hour. Scores of people were crushed in the mangled wrecks of their cars. Others were burned alive. Children returning home from school were slaughtered. No organization has yet claimed responsibility. In another part of Beirut, hundreds are being killed and wounded as Muslim fighters try to drive out armed Palestinians. A 3-day battle has been taking place in refugee camps where Christian militiamen slaughtered Palestinians in 1982. From the moment the U.S. Marines left Lebanon last year, it was open season for resumption of civil war. With the gradual retreat of the Israeli army as well, Lebanon has become a free fire zone. In recent weeks, hostile Muslim factions have fought each other for control of West Beirut. Across the line dividing west from East Beirut, Muslims and Christians are again shelling each other's civilian populations. The infiltration back into Lebanon of thousands of Palestinian guerrillas has triggered the new fighting around the refugee camps. With the Lebanese incapable of governing themselves, there is growing pressure in the country for the Syrian army to move in and restore order as it did in 1976. Meanwhile, a dying city awaits the inevitable reprisal for today's car bomb. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev today gave visiting Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi a major going-away gift at the end of a 2-day Moscow visit, almost $1.2 billion in new Soviet trade credits. The two men also signed an agreement for economic, technical, and scientific cooperation for the next 15 years. Gandhi visits Washington next month. The Commerce Department today reported that orders to U.S. factories for durable goods rose 1% in April. That reversed but did not make up for a 2-month decline in so-called big-ticket orders, which have been flat for about a year. And the report noted a 6.9% drop for non-defense capital goods last month. Analysts said that signals manufacturers who are spending billions to modernize factories are buying their equipment abroad because the strong dollar continues to make imports cheaper than American-made goods. A congressional study out tonight finds more of America's children living in poverty. More than 22 out of 100 in 1983. That's the highest child poverty rate since the mid-1960s. Unmarried mothers present the biggest child poverty problem, the study says, with 3 out of 4 of their children living below the official government poverty line. All told, the study says, even though the total population of America's children went down 9 million between 1968 and 1983, the number of poor children was up 3 million. One day after the Pentagon's much-publicized punishment of giant defense contractor General Dynamics for breaches of ethics, the chairman of General Dynamics, David Lewis, now says he will retire before the year is out. Lewis denies he is quitting under fire. There are many voices that say the way to get some of the red out of the federal budget deficit is to get some of the lead out of the way your tax dollars are spent, but knowing where to slice isn't the same as taking the cut. Charles Osgood looks tonight at the not-so-cutting edge of trimming the fat.
47 volumes, 2,478 recommendations. And the man who headed the commission that produced them says he still believes in every one.
We're going to be in national bankruptcy with a debt of $13 trillion in 15 years. So somewhere along that line, people are going to wake up, and we're only trying to wake them up faster and sooner.
But critics in and out of government who studied even a part of all of this have said we couldn't save anything like $424 billion. The General Accounting Office did a study a while back and could only find $100 billion in savings. Only $100 billion. And in a new report, the GAO says the savings would be substantial. But it's easier said than done.
For instance, the commission says the Pentagon could save billions of dollars by shutting down a few thousand military bases that have outlived their usefulness. Like Fort Monroe in Virginia, which is so old it actually has a moat. And Fort Douglas in Utah, which was built to guard a stagecoach trail. And Fort Sheridan in Chicago, where military folks get to play golf on one of the prettiest lakefront golf courses you ever saw. The Defense Department thought they could do without all these, charming though they might be.
We thought there were substantial savings to be made in the long run by shedding some of these smaller and less efficient places.
Thundering in as if on horseback to save the old forts was not the U.S. cavalry, but the U.S. Congress.
Any administration has to do business with Congress. And it's hard to win congressional support for other activities when you're trying to close down a military installation in a congressman's district.
In general, we failed to close any of the bases that we felt ought to be closed, and in general, that was because we simply couldn't make it stick politically.
Senator Tribble thinks the Grace Commission is right about a lot of things, but wrong about Fort Monroe.
A rather unusual old post, one that's protected the mouth of Hampton Roads since 1608.
How'd you say it's protected against what?
All threats, domestic and foreign.
It is said there might be unexploded ordnance buried around Fort Monroe. Maybe there is, and maybe there isn't. But it would cost a lot of money to find out. And that was all the ammunition Senator Tribble needed to defend his fort.
In fact, it cost less to keep it going than it would to close it.
Republican Senator Jake Garn of Utah thinks the Grace Commission is right about a lot of things, too, but wrong about Fort Douglas.
The net cost was an increase in cost to the taxpayers of closing Fort Douglas. And on that basis, I wasn't going to be a party to closing something that cost the government more money to do so.
There's a case to be made in defense of every one of the things the Grace Commission has attacked. And every person whose toes get stepped on is some congressman's constituent. And every installation is in somebody's district. And that, says Peter Grace, is why spending is out of control.
I can spend your money. I'm going to be the most generous guy in the world until you can get me by the throat.
But the political reality is that for years, Congress has felt more pressure to spend than it has to save. And that's why it is a lot easier to start a government project or to open a government installation than it is to shut one down, now or ever.
Fort Monroe was here long before we came along, and it will be here long after we pass on to the next life.
Charles Osgood, CBS News, New York.
The House of Representatives voted today for a federal budget that does not take the cuts in Social Security, cost of living increases President Reagan wants. It does take new deep cuts in defense spending increases the president didn't want. And in an MX missile battle centered in the Senate, the president tonight agreed to settle for less than he wanted. Phil Jones reports on this struggle that increasingly sees President Reagan under fire, some of it friendly fire, from his own Republican congressional troops.
Even his best friends are telling President Reagan that these are tough days on Capitol Hill.
I frankly told him right out front that, you know, we're operating under a damage control kind of scenario here.
That reference to damage control was to the House Democratic budget resolution, which passed overwhelmingly. It cuts $6 billion more in defense than the president wanted, and it does not freeze Social Security cost of living increases as Mr. Reagan requested. While the president was losing a budget battle, he was on the phone working on more damage control, trying to convince Democratic Senator Sam Nunn that MX missile deployment should not be capped at 40 as Nunn wants. The president has requested 100. So far in his second term, the president has had limited success in Congress. He has been forced into numerous compromises on the budget, and the battle with Congress continues over aid for Nicaraguan rebels, with the latest salvo at congressional critics coming today from the Secretary of State.
But by refusing to help the freedom fighters, even with humanitarian aid, they are hastening the day when the threat will grow and when we will be faced with an agonizing choice about the use of American combat troops.
But even the president's friends in Congress think the administration is involved in too much high drama.
If you continue to do that, it is much like the boy and the wolf. You know, it really is. I mean, how many times do you respond to a, quote, national emergency, a, quote, crisis, a this or that, and as legislators, you finally get about half goosey.
On the MX confrontation, a late development tonight, President Reagan made still another major concession, agreeing to a Democratic compromise to cap deployment of the MX at 50, half of his original request. Phil Jones, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
In Los Angeles today, the man who tried to steal stealth was sentenced to life in prison, a sentence even stiffer than the prosecution called for. Aerospace industry engineer Thomas Cavanaugh pleaded guilty to trying to sell the so-called stealth technology secrets to the Soviets, technology designed to make U.S. bombers invisible to enemy radar. The judge imposed the life sentence after calling Cavanaugh a traitor willing to sell his country out on the installment plan. New developments tonight in what federal officials fear is the U.S. Navy's worst ever security breach. Pentagon correspondent David Martin reports the arrest of a father and his active duty son in the Navy is not the end of this family spy affair. They suspect it runs deeper and wider.
The alleged father-son spy team of retired warrant officer John Walker and Navy seaman Michael Walker may be only the tip of an espionage iceberg. The FBI said today it expects to make more arrests among relatives and business associates suspected of participating in a plot to pass U.S. Navy secrets to the Soviet Union. One of the senior Walker's brothers is a retired Navy submarine officer. A stepbrother is still on active duty with the Navy. Walker's partner in a private investigating firm says she can't imagine him as a spy.
I just can't see him breaking the law. We sometimes in our business walk a fine line, but we don't cross that line.
In an interview with a Norfolk newspaper, Walker said from his jail cell, quote, "I'm a celebrity." Son Michael, who was suspected of having supplied his father with classified documents from his duty station aboard the aircraft carrier Nimitz, will be flown back to the U.S. this weekend to face charges of espionage. A knowledgeable source told CBS News that Michael was in charge of burning classified documents, giving him access to large quantities of secret material. Meanwhile, State Department sources say one employee of the Soviet embassy in Washington has been recalled by Moscow. The Soviet diplomat was spotted near this drop site where John Walker left a shopping bag full of classified Navy documents. The one silver lining in this case may turn out to be a manila envelope Walker was carrying when he was arrested. In it were maps and photos of drop sites the Russians used to communicate with their spies in the Washington area. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
In Providence, Rhode Island today, what's seen as a major setback to the state's case against Klaus von Bülow in his second trial on charges he tried to murder his heiress wife, the judge ruled out admission of 1982 testimony from Alexandra Isles, a sometime soap opera actress and von Bülow's former mistress. Jurors later said that testimony helped lead to their guilty verdict, which was later overturned. Today, the judge said the state had not tried hard enough to locate Isles